What can we expect from this budget? Hugely important, isn't it?
It is, but of course we've already had so many announcements. We already know what most of the tax increases are going to be, whether it's the national insurance one, whether it's the income tax increases through freezing of the tax thresholds that had been announced, all coming into effect next financial year. As of April, we know about the corporation tax increase, which is going to take place in 2023. So there is a lot of that will be bringing in more cash to the coffers of the exchequer. So the question is, can he give anything back? And of course, we've been hearing quite a lot of pre-announcements, which have been getting quite a lot of publicity as well, such as, what you've just been hearing about Darlington, for example, a lot of infrastructure spend that is going into various regions as part of the levelling up. We've heard also a little bit more about skills, but of course, remember that the funding for skills had been so low for quite some time, had been cut back. So that's coming back, at least in a way that is obviously satisfying quite a lot of people around the country, but it may not be enough yet. So there has to be more in the future. So the room for manoeuvre isn't going to be fantastically great. And you mentioned also, of course, the spending review that's happening. What's going to happen to various departments? What we see is that there's extra money already announced, an extra 6 billion for the National Health Service on top of whatever is going to go to the National Health Service because of the national insurance increases. But what about the rest of the departments? Yes, a little bit on education, a little bit of the stuff we're hearing about transport, but there will be, I think, a squeeze because the government will be trying to reduce the huge amount of debt that it has had to take on its books because of COVID. So there'll be some tight stuff ahead, I think, for quite a lot of departments, which are going to probably find some of the funding cut.
And Vicky, good morning to you. And yet the spin, as you say, is well underway. You had Rishi Sunak on the Andrew Marr programme on Sunday. We've had the announcement of nearly £6 billion going to the NHS. Sounds a lot of money. And the trouble is we lose sight of any sense of perspective on this. 6 billion, as I say, sounds a lot. There are predictions that it needs 9 billion spent just to stay as it is.
Absolutely. It's not just the National Health Service, but interestingly, we had the 7 billion infrastructure spend, which everyone thinks is, quite a large sum of money going into various regions, whether it's Greater Manchester or others. But in reality, it's over 5 years, and some of it had already been pre-announced anyway. And there are, concerns that, because of all those announcements, some of the stuff that we heard back in March may not happen. So there's a lot of concern that, for example, spending on R&D, research and development, which had been expected to rise very significantly, which we absolutely need if we're going to be having a more productive economy in the future, that may be cut back. And it will be very interesting to look at some of the details of this budget when it comes. But I think the most important area that will allow some room for manoeuvre, and maybe things won't be as bad as perhaps are painted in terms of spending in the future, may be linked to whatever happens in the economy. And I think what we're going to see probably is an upgrade of economic forecasts coming from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is strange given that we're just entering a period of uncertainty where everyone thinks perhaps things will get a little bit worse because of COVID in particular, because of gas price increases and so on. But if they are quite optimistic about growth, then there will be more of a room for manoeuvre for the Chancellor to either give a little bit back to ease some of the energy cost increases, a little bit more in investment, and maybe a little bit more for various departments that absolutely need it.
And Vicky, we're hearing a lot about, aren't we, net zero, the UK's sort of target by 2050. We're coming up to COP26 as well in Glasgow. And the government, that's very high on the agenda, isn't it? And the sort of funding for pocket parks across the UK and various other such sort of things.
Yes, well, the question is how much money there might be, and we do know that there's some huge investment that will be needed in all those areas, and little giveaways and aren't really going to do it. So the question is there enough that has been set aside to work alongside industry, which is going to have to invest a lot as well? How do you make industry really want to do it? What types of incentives are you going to give to them to do so? So there will need to be some money spent in that way. As we know, there is already extra money given to businesses, or rather there are deductions. There's a super deduction that's taking place right now if you invest, so you get back an awful lot from whatever you would have paid in your taxes from your on your profits. So if you invest right now, and I think there may be lots of other incentives of that type, we're going to be moving to, let's say, developing more hydrogen or really becoming more green with a lot of investment that needs to be made. Industries are going to have to see how they can share the risks with the government. So I think we're only the beginning of what the investment that needs to be done, looks like it might need to be. And I think the sums we've had so far are hardly enough to make any serious difference.
Vicky, can you help me? I don't understand why we've just been through 18 months of economic crisis, the toughest time since the Second World War, and yet we have a government that seems to be splashing the cash. How's that possible?
It's mainly because the markets are still prepared to lend to the government at reasonably low rates. The government is probably still going to have to borrow something like £200 billion this year, this financial year. It may be coming down next year because quite a lot of the initiatives, such as the furlough scheme, for example, have come to an end. So, and plus, of course, whatever extra help they were given through universal credit and so on has also finished. So only a few schemes remain, but the market still seem to be prepared to lend. Now, the real worry is what is going to happen with interest rates perhaps going up. We're already seeing the cost of borrowing by the government having gone up in the last few weeks. And of course, with inflation higher, the government also, because of a number of the bonds that it has issued are linked to inflation, has to pay more in servicing this debt. So it is an issue as to how long the markets were prepared to do it. For the moment, they seem to be quite happy, and with a bit of luck, they'll be able to do all that without huge extra costs. But yeah, the mood of the markets has changed. They now think that you can have quite high debt to GDP ratios, 100% in our case, even more in other countries, and still be able to borrow quite cheaply. Long may that last.